The Jerry Chronicles, a Texas survival story. You know how some people just stick in your mind like a splinter under your fingernail? Well, Jerry is that splinter for me. Even now, 11 years later, when I'm healthy and thriving and cancer-free, his name still makes my blood pressure spike, just a little. But let me tell you the story from the beginning, because it's not just about Jerry being a world-class asshole, though he absolutely was that. It's about what happens when you're fighting for your life in a state that doesn't give a damn about workers, and how sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor about timing. It was a Tuesday morning in March, when everything started going sideways. I remember because I always hated Tuesdays. Something about the way they drag after Monday's false promises. I'd been dealing with some irregular bleeding for a few weeks, the kind of thing that makes you worry but not panic, you know? The kind of thing you tell yourself you'll get checked out when things slow down at work, when you have better insurance, when you have time to be sick. But that Tuesday morning I woke up and knew something was seriously wrong. The bleeding had been heavy before, but this was different. This was like someone had turned on a faucet inside me and forgotten to turn it off. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the mess, and felt this cold fear creep up my spine. You know that feeling when your body is telling you something your mind doesn't want to hear? That was this moment. I called in sick to work, which is already a big deal. Jerry, my supervisor at the time, had made it crystal clear that calling in sick was basically admitting you were weak and unreliable. The man had a twisted view of dedication that involved showing up even if you were actively dying. I'd seen coworkers come in with the flu, with broken bones, with family emergencies, all because Jerry had this way of making you feel like garbage for having human needs. When I called, Jerry's voice was sharp and irritated right from the start. "What's wrong with you now?" he asked, like I made a habit of calling in sick. For the record, I'd taken exactly one sick day in the 8 months I'd been working there. "I'm having some medical issues," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to see a doctor." "Medical issues?" Jerry's tone was dripping with skepticism. "What kind of medical issues? Because unless you're bleeding out, I need you here today. We've got the Morrison account review, and you're the only one who knows the details." The irony wasn't lost on me. "Actually, Jerry, I am bleeding. Quite a lot. I think I need to go to the emergency room." There was a long pause and then Jerry laughed. Actually laughed. "Come on, you're being dramatic. Take some Advil and get in here. We'll figure it out after the meeting." I felt my jaw clench. "Jerry, I'm not being dramatic. I need medical attention. Look, I get it. Women's problems, right? But you can't just bail on your responsibilities every time you get your period. That's not how the working world operates." Women's problems. Like my uterus was just being particularly emotional that day. I wanted to reach through the phone and throttle him, but I was also starting to feel dizzy, which made the whole conversation feel surreal and distant. "I'm going to the hospital," I said firmly. "I'll call you when I know more. If you leave work to go to the hospital for some cramps, don't bother coming back." Jerry snapped. "I'm not running a daycare here." I hung up on him, actually hung up on my supervisor, which felt both terrifying and liberating at the same time. Then I called my mom. My mom, bless her heart, didn't ask a lot of questions. I told her I was bleeding heavily and needed to go to the ER, and she said she'd meet me there. No drama, no 20 questions, just "I'll be there in 15 minutes. That's the kind of person you want in your corner when the world is falling apart. The drive to the hospital was a blur. I kept towels in the car because I'd learned that lesson the hard way over the past few weeks, but even with preparation, I was a mess. Every red light felt like an eternity, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. The ER was packed, as emergency rooms always are, but when I walked up to the triage nurse and explained what was happening, her expression changed immediately. She took one look at me and called for someone else. Within minutes, I was in a room, and let me tell you, that never happens in an ER unless something is really wrong. The nurse who came to check on me was this older guy, probably in his 50s, with kind eyes and steady hands. He'd clearly seen everything the job could throw at him, but when he saw the extent of the bleeding, his face went pale. "Honey," he said, his voice gentle but serious, "I've been doing this for 23 years. And I've never seen this much blood from vaginal bleeding. We need to get you stabilized right now." I'll never forget those words. I've never seen this much blood. Coming from someone who'd probably seen every kind of medical emergency you can imagine, that was terrifying. but also validating, you know? Jerry had made me feel like I was overreacting, but here was a medical professional telling me this was serious. My mom arrived just as they were starting to run tests. She took one look at me, pale, shaky, barely able to keep my eyes open, and immediately went into protective mom mode. She started asking questions, taking notes, making sure I had everything I needed. I was so grateful to have her there because I could barely think straight. The doctor came in about an hour later with results that made my stomach drop. My hemoglobin levels were dangerously low. They needed to give me blood transfusions immediately, and I was going to be admitted to the hospital. This wasn't a quick ER visit and back to work. This was serious, life-threatening stuff. "We need to contact your emergency contacts," the nurse said. "Is there anyone else we should call?" I gave them my mom's information, and stupidly, I also gave them Jerry's number as my work contact. I thought maybe, just maybe, when he heard from the hospital directly, he'd understand that this wasn't me being dramatic or weak. My mom called Jerry while I was getting my first blood transfusion. I could hear her side of the conversation from my hospital bed, and I watched her face go from concerned to confused to absolutely furious. "Jerry, this is Susan. I'm calling about my daughter," she said. "She's in the hospital receiving blood transfusions. She's very sick." I couldn't hear Jerry's response, but I could see my mom's jaw clench. "No, Jerry, this is not stress. She's lost a dangerous amount of blood and needs immediate medical attention." Another pause. My mom's voice got that sharp edge it gets when she's trying not to completely lose her temper. "She needs to get back to work? Jerry." She can't even lift her head up. She's receiving her second blood transfusion. The conversation went downhill from there. My mom hung up and looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Part protective fury, part disbelief. "That man," she said, her voice shaking with anger, "just told me that you're probably just stressed and need to get back to work. He said you could take a bus across town if you really needed to come in." A bus. A bus across town. I was so weak I needed help sitting up to drink water. But Jerry thought I could navigate Houston public transportation to come fold his precious paperwork. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so infuriating. I spent 3 days in the hospital for that first admission. 3 days of blood transfusions, medications, and doctors trying to figure out what was causing the bleeding. I felt like I was living in some kind of fog, physically exhausted, emotionally drained, and constantly worried about what was happening at work. On the second day, I tried calling Jerry to explain the situation and give him an update. "Big mistake. So, when are you coming back?" was literally the first thing he said. Not "how are you feeling?" or "what did the doctors say?" Just "when are you coming back?" "Jerry, I'm still in the hospital. They're trying to figure out what's wrong." "Well, figure out faster. I've got clients asking for you, and I can't keep covering for you indefinitely." Covering for me. Like I was on some kind of vacation instead of fighting for my life in a hospital bed. "I'll be back as soon as the doctors clear me," I said. "Make it soon. This is really putting us in a bind." When I got discharged, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. The doctors had managed to stabilize me and stop the worst of the bleeding, but they still didn't know what was causing it. I had follow-up appointments scheduled, more tests to run, and strict instructions to rest and avoid stress. I went back to work the next day because I was terrified of losing my job. Looking back, I can't believe I did that. But when you're living paycheck to paycheck in a right-to-work state, you don't have a lot of options. Jerry acted like nothing had happened, like I'd just taken a long weekend instead of nearly bleeding to death. But my body wasn't done with me yet. 2 weeks later, the bleeding started again, and this time I didn't even bother calling Jerry. I just went straight to the hospital. The second hospital stay was, when they found it, a large growth in my uterus that was causing all the bleeding. They scheduled me for a D&C procedure to remove it and send it for biopsy. Finally, we had answers, or at least the beginning of answers. Jerry, of course, was less than thrilled about me needing another procedure. "How long is this going to take?" he asked when I called to let him know about the surgery. "It's outpatient, but I'll need a few days to recover." "A few days? For what exactly?" I tried to explain the procedure, but Jerry cut me off. "Look, I don't need the gory details. Just get it done and get back to work. We're not a charity here." The D&C was scheduled for a Friday, and I was told to expect to be out of work for about a week while I recovered. Simple enough, right? Wrong. The procedure itself went fine, but recovery was harder than I expected. I was exhausted, still dealing with some bleeding, and generally felt like I'd been wrung out like a dish rag. I spent the weekend in bed, trying to rest and follow my doctor's orders. But Jerry had other plans for me. I was lying in bed on Tuesday morning, still feeling pretty rough when my phone rang. Jerry's name on the caller ID made my stomach drop. "Why aren't you at work?" he demanded as soon as I answered. "Jerry, I'm still recovering from the procedure. The doctor said I need to rest." The doctor said a lot of things. "I'm saying I need you at work. We've got deadlines. I can't come in today. I'm following medical orders." Medical orders? Jerry's voice was getting that sharp, nasty edge. "Or you're milking this for all it's worth?" I felt tears of frustration start to well up. "Jerry, I'm not milking anything. I had surgery. I need time to recover." "Surgery." He said it like it was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. "You had some minor procedure. People go back to work after having their wisdom teeth out." "This wasn't wisdom teeth, Jerry. Whatever it was, I need you here. If you're not in by noon, don't bother coming in at all." He hung up before I could respond. I lay there staring at my phone, feeling this mix of anger, fear, and exhaustion that I'd never experienced before. I called my mom, sobbing, and she came over to sit with me while I tried to figure out what to do. "You can't go to work," she said firmly. "You can barely stand up for more than a few minutes. But if I don't go, he'll fire me." "Then let him fire you. You can't put your health at risk for a job." Easy for her to say, but she wasn't the one who'd be out of work and health insurance right when she needed medical care most. I didn't go to work that day, or the next day, or the day after that. I was physically incapable of it, and for once in my life, I listened to my body instead of my fear. Thursday morning, my phone rang. "Jerry again. Congratulations," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've officially taken too much time off. You're fired." "Jerry, wait." "No waiting. Clean out your desk by Friday, or we'll dispose of your stuff ourselves." "But I have a medical excuse. I'm following doctor's orders." "Doctor's orders don't pay the bills around here. Find a job where you can be sick all the time. This isn't it." He hung up. Just like that, I was unemployed, uninsured, and still waiting for biopsy results that would determine whether I had cancer. I spent that weekend in a weird state of limbo. Part of me was relieved to be away from Jerry's toxic management style. But part of me was terrified about what came next. I had some savings, but not much, and losing my health insurance right when I needed it most was a nightmare scenario. Monday morning, I got the call I'd been dreading. The biopsy results were in, and my doctor wanted to see me right away. Never a good sign. I'll never forget sitting in that sterile office, watching my doctor's face as she delivered the news. Cancer. The growth they'd removed was malignant, and we needed to discuss treatment options immediately. Cancer. At 32 years old, I had cancer. The first person I called was my mom. The second call I made was to Jerry. "Jerry, it's me. I just wanted to let you know that the biopsy came back positive. I have cancer." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Jerry, well," he said finally, "I guess that explains all the drama." "All the drama." I had cancer and he called it drama. "I just thought you should know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Okay. Well, good luck with that." And he hung up. No apology, no acknowledgement that maybe he'd been wrong to fire me. No basic human decency. Just good luck with that. I sat there holding my phone, feeling this rage build up inside me that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This man had made the worst period of my life even worse with his complete lack of empathy and understanding. He'd fire me for having cancer, essentially, though he didn't know it at the time. My friend Ruth came over that evening to check on me. She's the kind of friend who brings wine and tissues and doesn't try to fix everything, just sits with you in the mess. I told her about the cancer diagnosis, about Jerry's reaction, about the whole horrible situation. "You know what you should have done?" Ruth said, pouring us both another glass of wine. "You should have taken that growth they removed and put on Jerry's pillow. Let him wake up to that nightmare." I actually laughed for the first time in days. I thought about doing something like that. I wanted to take it and plop it right on his desk with a note that said, "This is what drama looks like. Why didn't you?" The damn hospital wouldn't let me keep it. I asked. I was dead serious about it, but they said it was medical waste and had to be disposed of properly. We spent the evening coming up with increasingly elaborate revenge fantasies involving Jerry and various bodily fluids and medical specimens. It was juvenile and probably not the healthiest way to process my anger, but it felt good to laugh about something, even if it was dark humor. The cancer treatment was its own kind of hell, but at least it was a hell with a purpose. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, the whole 9 yards. I was lucky to have good doctors and a support system that included my mom, Ruth, and a few other friends who showed up when it mattered. What I didn't have was income or insurance. Losing my job right before a cancer diagnosis was like getting punched in the gut while you're already down. The medical bills were astronomical, and I ended up having to move back in with my mom to make ends meet. Some of my friends suggested I should sue Jerry and a company for wrongful termination. You could probably make a case, my friend Marcus said. Firing someone for having a medical condition has got to be illegal. Not in Texas, I said. Right to work means they can fire you for pretty much anything, and I hadn't been there long enough to have any real protections. Plus, I was a little busy dealing with cancer at the time. The legal system in Texas is not exactly employee-friendly, especially for someone like me who was still in their probationary period and couldn't afford a lawyer. Right-to-work laws sound great in theory. Freedom for workers to choose whether to join unions, but in practice, they often mean freedom for employers to treat workers like disposable resources. I spent the next year focused on getting better. The cancer treatment was brutal, but I was determined to beat this thing. I had so much anger and frustration build up that I channeled it all into fighting for my life. Every chemo session, every radiation treatment, every follow-up appointment was a middle finger to Jerry and everyone else who had written me off. The day I got my first clear scan was one of the best days of my life. Not just because it meant the treatment was working, but because it meant I was going to survive this. I was going to outlive Jerry's prediction that I was just being dramatic. It's been 11 years now since that awful spring when my life fell apart and came back together in a completely different shape. 11 years cancer-free, which feels like a miracle every single day. I have a different job now with better benefits and a boss who actually cares about his employees' well-being. I've learned to advocate for myself in ways I never could before, but I still think about Jerry sometimes. Not because I miss him or want to reconnect, but because he represents something important about how we treat each other when we're vulnerable. He had opportunities to show compassion, to be understanding, to act like a decent human being, and he chose not to. Every single time. I don't know what happened to Jerry after I left the company. I heard through the grapevine that he got promoted, which probably surprised no one. Men like Jerry often fail upward in corporate America, leaving a trail of damaged employees in their wake. What I do know is that his behavior during the worst crisis of my life taught me something valuable about who I want to be in the world. I never want to be the person who makes someone else's suffering worse because it's inconvenient for me. I never want to be the person who dismisses someone's pain because I don't understand it. When I was going through treatment, I met so many people who were fighting their own battles: cancer, other diseases, family crises, financial disasters. And I noticed that the people who seemed to handle their challenges with the most grace were often the ones who had experienced the most hardship. They understood that life can change in an instant, that health is precious, that work is important but not more important than being alive. Jerry never learned that lesson. Maybe he never had to. Maybe he's lived his whole life without ever facing a real crisis, without ever having to depend on the kindness of others, without ever having to choose between his health and his paycheck. I hope I'm wrong about that. I hope he learned to be better, to treat people with more compassion, to understand that everyone is fighting battles he knows nothing about. But I'm not holding my breath. What I am doing is living my life as fully as I can. I'm 11 years cancer-free, and that's something to celebrate every single day. I have work that I find meaningful, relationships that sustain me, and a perspective on what really matters that I wouldn't trade for anything. I also have a story that I tell sometimes when I meet people who are going through their own workplace nightmares or health crises. I tell them about Jerry, about the hospital, about the biopsy results and the phone calls and the complete lack of basic human decency I encountered when I was most vulnerable. Not because I want them to feel sorry for me, but because I want them to know that they can survive the Jerrys of the world. They can survive the bad bosses, the unfair systems, the times when everything seems to be falling apart at once. They can survive and thrive and build better lives on the other side of whatever crisis they're facing. And sometimes when I'm feeling particularly petty, I end the story with "fuck you, Jerry. Fuck you." Because even after 11 years, even after everything I've learned about forgiveness and letting go and moving forward, that man still deserves those words. He deserves them for every person he's probably treated badly since then. He deserves them for every employee who's been afraid to call in sick because they know their boss will make them feel guilty about it. He deserves them for every worker who's been fired for having the audacity to get sick at an inconvenient time. But mostly, he deserves them because saying those words feels good, and after everything I've been through, I figure I've earned the right to feel good about surviving and thriving despite his best efforts to make my life miserable. So here's to 11 years cancer-free, to second chances, to medical professionals who take women's pain seriously, to friends who show up with wine and tissues, to mothers who ask no questions and just say, "I'll be there in 15 minutes. And here's to Jerry wherever he is, doing whatever he's doing. I hope he's learned to be better. But if he hasn't, well, karma has a way of catching up with people eventually. Fuck you, Jerry. Fuck you very much.